Well, hello everyone. It is 6:30 Central Time, which means it is time to get started. Looks like we have some people still coming into the webinar, so we'll give you just a few minutes while I'm kind of going through some housekeeping information here. So as you can see on your screen, if you are having problems with audio, you can actually go up to audio and speaker microphone audio test. And if you are probably having problems, I doubt you can hear me anyway because you're having audio problems. But if that's the case, then I'll move over to this help page, and that's where you can send me chat messages. And my name is Blake Davis. So what I am is the AV technician for the webinar today. And essentially what that means is I'm here in the background for anything that you may need with the technology end of the webinar. So essentially my job is to hopefully let you forget that I'm here. But if you need me, I am here. So feel free to send me a chat message, and you can see on your right side there should be a little chat panel. And if you hit the little button down on that, kind of a little tilde key, you can see AV Tech, that's me, and you can send me a message. And feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'll be here live on the webinar to help you with anything. So as we move on to the webinar, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. This webinar, to remind you, is a production of Discipleship Ministries, which means it's made possible through your generous support of the World Service Fund of the United Methodist Church. So again, I'm Blake Davis, today's AV Tech, and the title of this webinar, as we're all anticipating, is Tax Changes and Local Church Giving. So this should be a pretty hot topic with tax season coming up. And just to let you know, in case your cat got stuck in the curtains again and you have to step away for any reason, this is being recorded. So that means that you can find it online. I'll be sending an email out most likely tomorrow afternoon to everyone here, and you can feel free to listen to it at your leisure. So that being said, feel free to message me if you need anything, and I will pass the ball off to Kim Sloan, who can get us started.
Great. Thanks, Blake. If I had a cat, my cat would probably be stuck in the curtains. Hope you don't have to put up with that tonight, but I'm thrilled that folks are here tonight. We've had great registration, and we'll still have some more folks clicking on even as we get started here. So I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled that we're able to take on this topic. I want to just I'm going to give you a little background. I call this a new webinar. It's a webinar I haven't done before. It's a webinar that really came in response to Blake and I did a webinar with Don Joyner back in February. It was a daytime webinar focused on clergy income tax and filing and what kind of changes, both what they'd have to deal with filing their 2017 taxes, which many of you are doing or just have finished doing this early part of the year, but also to look a little bit ahead on what some of the impact is going to be for clergy with the new tax bill that came into place at the end of last year, but really will cover this year that we're moving through right now. And because there was a big registration, there seemed to be a lot of anxiousness and uncertainty about it. As soon as we got done with that webinar, I really came to the conclusion that we needed to do an evening webinar that really focused on our local church leaders in finance and stewardship, and hopefully be able to kind of take a breath and kind of look together at what these changes how they might impact churches, and to kind of be a little proactive in talking about some things and how they might work. Before I go on to the next slide, I do want to mention to you is that one of the things that might be impacting your church and very seriously impacting your pastoral leadership, if you're having a change of pastors this year, are some changes to the way the new tax law covers moving expenses. And I did a blog on this just this past week, and kind of advertised it on social media in a couple of places, and it's gotten a lot of attention. And so while you're watching the webinar tonight, I'm going to ask Blake to go ahead and put the link up to that blog if it's something that you want to look at afterwards. The changes to moving expenses affect everybody, but as you can imagine, in our United Methodist system where pastors are moved and appointed pretty frequently, it could have a big impact. Moving expenses will no longer be deductible. And even if the church that pastor is moving to pays the expenses, they have to report that to the pastor as income. So it's kind of detailed in the blog. There's a statement there from the legal team at the General Counsel on Finance and Administration there in the blog. And if you're a clergy person tonight, or if you're a leader in your church in finance, it might be something that you want to look at. And so I didn't put a slide for it, but I thought I would at least mention it right here at the top of the program, so you'll have an opportunity to take a look at that. Again, I've found that a lot of folks are been kind of surprised by it, but it's one of the changes that will certainly have an impact if you're going to be going through a change of a pastor during this appointment season. You've already met Blake. He's the young, good-looking guy that is there to tell you that he's going to fix your audio, and if he has to fix your audio, you probably can't hear him tell you that, as he said. And I'm Ken Sloan, and my role is Director of Stewardship and Connectional Ministries at our Board of Discipleship. Discipleship Ministries is what we go by. And I'm glad to be here with you for the webinar tonight, and hopefully we'll cover our material quickly and have time to speak to a bunch of concerns that people have. Blake was kind enough to send everybody who had registered as of this morning, I believe, a copy of the handout of the slides. Folks have asked us to get those ahead of time to take notes. If for some reason you didn't get a handout, here's my email address. Just send me an email. It's ksloan@umcdiscipleship.org, and Sloan is spelled with an E on the end. If you send that, I will get it. If for some reason you don't find this, you can also email at stewardship@umcdiscipleship.org, and I get to look at those eventually. I don't see them quite as quickly as I see the stuff that comes to me directly. But that's one way to get a copy of these handouts for you. We're going to take a minute to see where everybody is tonight, and so Blake, just give us some quick direction on how folks can check in where they are.
Absolutely. So for those of you who are in the U.S. right now, you'll see in the top left, well, wherever you are, you'll see in the top left, but for the map right now, those in the U.S., there should be a little arrow, and you can see this red arrow here on the screen. This guy here is pointing to it. So if you want to click that button and then click on the screen here, show us about where you are, and I'll click. I think that we're just about into Nashville about there. So I've just turned the annotation on for everybody in the webinar, so you should be able to click and show us. Oh, great. We got people all over. All right. Lots of people I know. Now I understand why so many people were asking me if this was Eastern time. Looks like we have a lot of Eastern time listeners right now, so that makes sense. Definitely coming together here. All right, and we'll give you just another minute to test this out. One of the reasons we're doing this is to train you for something we have coming up where we do need some participation from you. So go ahead and click where you are. And those who are international, do not fear. We will have an international slide coming up in just a moment. So just a few more seconds.
Sure.
Looks like that's everybody. So let's move on. And here's for those who are international. So I'll try to find Nashville here again, but it's really small. But I believe we have a few people listening, some in the UK. So if you can find yourselves, click on and see if you can get that working. And let's see here. Lots of US people.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody international? I know we had some registrants, but I don't know if they were able to make it in with the time change. So.
Well, and you know, we try to do webinars that are, that have some value to folks in the global church. But of course, when you're talking about tax changes in the U.S.,
right,
it's sometimes folks who may be living outside the country but still have to send Uncle Sam their tax money at this time. So anyhow, we hope that it'll be helpful to you. We got people from way up north. That's cool.
Oh, wow. Well, let's go ahead and move forward. And Ken, I'll let you give the disclaimer here.
Okay. Well, here's the disclaimer, and this is what I want to make sure that everybody's here, that I am not, I repeat, I am not a CPA or a tax attorney. I did a webinar in February with Don Joyner, who is neither a CPA or a tax attorney, but he does a lot of taxes and had a lot of expertise. That's not me. There's no content that presented here that is tax or legal advice in any way for anybody in terms of doing their taxes. Don't come back and say, Ken said this was okay. I don't pretend to know all the details of the new or the old tax code, and my opinions are based exclusively not on any education that I've had, but simply on reading some sources that speak specifically to how these tax laws might impact on charitable giving. So, if you've read my disclaimer, you two things what you can do. One is you can take your little arrow and you can click in the box so I know that you read it.
Yes.
Put your finger on the screen and you can do an initial there, which Blake will see. There you go.
Yes, there you go. And so either do the arrow or the little text tool to type out your name, either one. But we have a couple people who are in, looks like they're streaming from an iPad or smartphone, and sometimes that's a little difficult. So we'll just say, if you're listening, know that, nod your head. By listening, you are submitting to this. We'll just say that.
Right. I just want to make sure you know, and we'll like to say, we'll move things along with that assumption that you're all kind of ready to buy into this. I do want to say to you too that really the reason for doing this is to try and alleviate some anxiety. It's not necessarily to give you, I don't have any magic silver bullets that are going to solve any of the concerns that we might have, but there's been a lot of stuff, especially in the areas that I look and read, about how some of the tax changes are going to affect people's giving and how that might happen. And this is just an example of a piece that was on the Forbes site early on, and talking about 21 million taxpayers will stop taking charitable deductions under the new tax law, which if you're a financial secretary or a local church treasurer, that has some potential to give you a little bit of angst. I understand that. In this particular article, which I think was very similar to many of the articles that I read trying to look at this, that assertion that the tax changes are going to impact charitable giving. Well, they're going to impact how people do their taxes, definitely. Whether or not it's going to impact charitable giving and how it probably will impact in some way, is it going to impact in a positive way or a negative way? We really don't know that answer just yet. Some of the facts that have been lifted up, and you probably have seen some of these, the difference between the raising of the standard deduction so that people don't itemize deduction takes away an incentive in the minds of some of the writers for people to give. That the fact that people could itemize their deductions and deduct that from their income was a big incentive for people in some of their giving, and in some places it is. And they talk about numbers that, going from 37 million people to about 16 million people who will be able to itemize. And again, you can see some of these figures, fall by 2/3. People in the $86,000 to $150,000 category, family income. The number of people who can itemize in that category might go from 39% to 15%. And these are just some of the speculations that are going on. And again, I see these in different places. But what I have to tell you is that I don't have the magic 8 ball that I can give you the answer on this, but there's 3 kind of views that I see as I'm doing my reading. The scariest one is that church giving could drop by about 5%. I've seen some people speculate in that area. I don't think I've seen anybody who's tried to estimate that it would be more than that. It could have an impact on that. That, I think, is probably a pretty bad scenario in a lot of our situations. The second scenario that I've read is that church giving is not going to be affected at all, that people believe that church giving in particular ties to a different level of people's hearts, and that it's really not going to be influenced so much by the incentive of itemizing over taking the standard deduction. And then, of course, the third view, which I've seen a number of people say, is that, it's this little bit of anxiety around this that might actually get us a little more active in talking about people's giving. And in fact, there's some churches that might kind of, in moving in a positive way, loosen up some other gifts that they might not get otherwise. So there's all kinds of different views in that we want to be looking at. Let's also remember, too, that especially for those of us in the U.S., we have other factors that are impacting into this, too. And so we want to be clear that, many of us know that church membership is on the decline in so many places. Not every church is declining in their membership, but overall, as a culture in the U.S., this seems to be one of the trends that we're dealing with. The other trend that we have a lot of concern about is the fact that our membership kind of demographic kind of skews towards the older age range, and so we are looking each year at a number of deaths of people who have been faithful members of our church in those kind of ways. So again, as we try to read the things that are happening around giving and around the total giving that comes into the church, all these factors really need to be kept in mind. But what I'd like to start with really tonight as we begin to kind of look at this and try to be a little proactive about it is to lift up this question, which I think is really at the heart of it. And that is, I think, a question that each of us has to ask. You have to ask it in your own context. And so the question is the ability to deduct charitable gifts what motivates our folks in their giving to the church? Is it that really that incentive of that tax deduction? Is that really what's bringing people, what's motivating, what's stirring the generosity in people to give to the church? And, you know, I can't answer that for your situation. There's a lot of different contexts. But as a whole, if we were to look at our denomination, I believe that who we are as United Methodists, we're led in a very special way through our heritage, through our reading of Scripture, to be people of compassion and caring. And so I believe that the more people are committed to the vision of who we are as a United Methodist Church, I believe we're going to find that this factor of itemizing or not itemizing is going to, I think, play less into the picture. But let me back up a step from that too, just to make sure that we're all clear. And many of you out there have a lot more financial background than I do. I find that out every time I do a webinar and people come up with great suggestions to me afterwards, very constructive things. But these are important facts to remember. The charitable giving deduction is not going away. And sometimes we read these articles and we think the people are no longer going to get a deduction for their charitable giving. What happened was that what we did was we raised the level of the standard deduction. And so when Congress voted to do this, they raised the level of what married couples were able to take as the standard deduction, below which they would be raised up to that standard deduction. So if you were a married couple and you were in 2017, if you had put together all of your deductions and the total of your deductions was $9,000, you would be raised up to a level of $12,700. So you'd be given that benefit, that you'd be raised up to that level. So what happened in the new tax law is people are actually being raised up to a higher level, to a level of about $24,000, regardless of where they fall underneath that, before they get to the point where they go over and they itemize and they can get the benefit of giving more than $24,000. So if somebody gives $10,000 and somebody their total deductions are $10,000 and another person's total deductions, another couple's total deductions are $24,100. The first couple is going to get $24,000 and the second couple is going to get $24,100. So charitable deductions are there. They're still there. What we need to keep that in mind, that it's a standard deduction is the thing that's just going up. It's also important to know that people who do itemize their deductions, people whose deductions are going to go above that $24,000 mark, and this is not just charitable, this is charitable and other things that you can deduct, they can deduct more of their giving than they could before. Under the old tax law, people were limited, I believe, to about 50% of what their taxable income. They couldn't deduct more than 50% of their taxable income. That number's been lifted up to about 60%. So there's actually an incentive there, or the permission for folks to deduct more. So that's some positive news. The other fact to remember is that under this new tax plan, when you think about the kind of economic brackets that many of our churches are in, many of our people will actually get to hold on to more of their money because the brackets have gone down, the percentages have gone down. Many of our people will be actually paying a little less tax and seeing some larger returns. Now, not everyone, but certainly some of the people. And again, that's a very contextual question. It's going to depend on where you are and what the context of the community in which you're doing ministry. So I tried to come up with just an example of this, and this is probably not a foolproof example or whatever, but just tried to illustrate this in a way. And so you have a married filing jointly couple, no children, the kids are all out of the house, no deductions there. And just trying to say, and we're saying their combined income was $100,000. Now, under the old law, and actually I believe these numbers were 2017 numbers, not what the law would have been in 2018, but anyway, just we'll use them for argument's sake. They were able to take a personal deduction for each of them. That came out to about $8,100. And then their total deductions fell just over the threshold for the standard deduction, so it was $12,900. I believe that in 2017 it was $12,700. I believe was the standard deduction. If you fell under that, you just took the standard deduction. So they fell a little bit over that. So you add that all up, and again, I tried to come up with numbers that were neat and come out. So they're looking at a taxable income of about $79,000, of which under the brackets that were before, 25% bracket for people in that kind of category, their tax would be about $19,750. Now, of course, there could be a lot of other factors that go into that, but we'll kind of push all those to the side. Under the new law, same income, $100,000. There is no personal exemption, so that's gone from the picture, which again, kind of in many ways kind of mitigates how big and dramatic this change is. But now those folks get to take the $24,000 standard deduction. Even if they fall below it, they get moved up to that $24,000 level. So now they're looking at a taxable income of $76,000. And again, because the tax bracket has gone down to 22, we're really looking at like a real tax savings of $3,000, a little more. And so it means that there is more money that is actually in people's pockets. You know, I'm always amazed that when people kind of think about their tax returns as being sort of a gift that comes from the government, and really, you know, it's money the government's holding on to make sure you have enough to pay your taxes, and what they're returning to you is just, you know, it's your money that's been held up by them. But that's an important factor to keep in mind. So let me also share with you some of the positive information. Is those that do itemize can give more. And I'm drawing this material from a great little brochure that some of my colleagues at Africa University, their development office, came up with. And again, some of these points are great, and I actually made a PDF of this afternoon. I scanned it. I should have thought to have Blake send it out, but I'll send, when Blake gives me your email addresses, I'll send it all out to you, because there are probably some people in your congregation who are in a place where there'll be itemized deductions and maybe can give a little bit more and may want to know about some other different ways of giving. So you see some of those possibilities there. As I said before, gifts of cash. In the past, you could deduct 50% of your adjusted gross income. That's been increased to 60%. That can be good news for many of our donors. Generally, if you're in a higher bracket, your greater savings comes from charitable gifts, because again, if your bracket goes up, it can make a difference of maybe pulling you under. One of the things that's talked about in this, and that's one of the things that churches should be thinking about as well, is for people who maybe are on the borderline about whether or not they can itemize their deductions, or they're kind of tied to the standard deduction. A lot of people are finding that it's wise to increase their giving in a single year to get the maximize the deduction they can get. A great example of this is if we had done this webinar in the fall of 2017. Of course, we didn't know about the tax changes there until December, but if we had been done at that point, one of the things we could say to people is, hey, do a little bit of your 2018 giving in 2017 when you're going to get the benefit of a lower standard deduction, and you can itemize more. It'll help you more in 2017 than maybe it's going to help you in 2018, and people could weigh those kind of decisions as well. As always, people who want to give securities, stocks, mutual funds, bonds, all those things, all those are good ways for people to give, because they can claim those deductions at market value and they don't have to get involved in capital gains tax. And again, this is not my area. So you'll see right down here at the bottom, I say consult a financial advisor, or recommend that someone who wants to make a gift like that consults a financial advisor, so they really weigh all the pros and cons. Another great way for folks to give is to give directly from their IRA. It's a great way to save the tax that you pay when you take that money out. And you may know that some of our folks who reach their 70 and a half mid-year birthday have to begin taking out some money from their IRA if they've held on to it. So if they're giving to the church and they're expressing their generosity that way, that's a great source from them to take that money out, because in most cases they've deducted it as they've given. They've deducted it so it's taxable when it comes out, and they can just give it right to the church and avoid paying those taxes. So again, there are some positives that we have to highlight. I think that's important for us to lift up to folks. All right, so I'm almost at the top of the hour. So what I'd like to focus on from here on, and then take your questions, is to really give you some tips, I think, as I look at this, of ways that, not that we can get around the tax law, but ways that we can be a little proactive in how we approach this year of uncertainty. Because again, we really don't know what the impact is going to be. I kind of lean that the people who are saying the impact is going to be enormous, I don't think it's going to be quite as enormous as we think. Again, if we separate out other things that are going to affect our income, like declining membership or people who are good givers dying off or whatever, I don't know that this exemption thing is going to have the impact that folks are thinking have, but I could be wrong, and we're in that year of uncertainty. So here are the 10 tips that I've come up with, and I've kind of run these by some other folks, and I think they're things to consider and that you may want to consider in the course of leading your church people. And the first one is, don't panic. Getting anxious about it, getting worried about it, wringing our hands together, it doesn't do us really any good. It's not. And I've talked to you as somebody who, my wife would tell you, I should be in the front of the line of worriers. But I also try to look at the things that worrying about is going to be completely unproductive. And this is one of those things that we just don't need to be immobilized by our worry about how we're going to wind up on January 1st, 2019, with looking at our 2018. I think being concerned is legitimate, but the truth is we won't know until that last gift comes in on the 31st of December, and then we'll be able to weigh the impact it has. And of course, I'm sure people will write overall as we gather up data about whatever impact it's had or hasn't had. But keep calm, carry on, do the work that you're supposed to do, and again, use this as an opportunity to be a little proactive as we talk. My second tip, I think, is really important, and some of you, I know, I see the names, you've been in other webinars with me. I think it's important for us to focus on what motivates our givers, your givers. What is it that motivates them? What is it that stirs the passion in people? That's so much more important, I believe, than weighing whether our people are going to get the standard deduction or itemize. What are the things that motivate our givers? I love this picture of these school children in Côte d'Ivoire, where our church, United Methodist Church, is there. Are your people motivated by the stories about local giving? Are they motivated by global giving, about giving to children? What are the things that get them excited about giving? And sit down with your committee and begin to look at those things and begin to say, hey, what are the things that really stimulate that generosity inside of people. I had the opportunity yesterday to hear a young pastor talk who's been involved in a new church start here in the Nashville area, Providence Church, Jacob Armstrong. And Jacob talked about in his preaching, he says, I look into the congregation and I look for the people that when I'm talking about Jesus, their eyes get bright. And I said, what I would say to you is, what are the things in the life of your church, in the life of its generosity, that makes people's eyes get bright? They perk up, they smile, they feel good about those. And that's a worthy conversation, I think, to have. What are the things that motivate your people? I believe a lot of people get motivated by stories. They want to hear about changes. I'll talk more about that in one of my other tips. Sometimes people get motivated by being thanked, by being recognized, by celebrating. What are the things that motivate your givers? Spend some time thinking about that. Think about when you've had appeals or campaigns that have gone really well. What were the qualities of those appeals or campaigns that went particularly well and that made that a success? Okay. I'm seeing the message here to turn my mic up. Let me see if I can still do that. Hold on a second. Give me 1 second to do that. I just happened to look down and see that was there. Input microphone. Okay. Blake, is that better? Oh, I can see it is.
Yeah, there we go. Great. I didn't want to interrupt your flow there, but had a couple people ask. Perfect.
No problem. And Blake knows that I've told him I don't always look down at the chat panel when I'm talking and looking at the slides, but I'm glad I saw that. So sorry about that. It should be a little bit better. So that's tip number 2, is focus on what motivates your givers. Tip 3, and this is probably obvious to some of you, is that I think this whole concern that we have, those of us who are involved in finance and stewardship in the life of the church, I think we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it with each other. We need to talk about it at our committees. I think it's a great topic to talk about at your church council, to really get a feel for people, maybe people who sit around that table, about, is this really going to be this big impact that oftentimes people are expecting and worrying about? And again, to talk about that very basic question that I gave you. Is the itemized deduction really what motivates our people to give? But have conversations about it. If you think it's impacting you already, you need to talk to the congregation about it. Like I say, I would say that you need to be very intentional and very careful about how you talk about it with folks. But I think you need to be open and upfront about it. I'm hoping sometimes that this particular time of anxiety might give birth to some conversations about money that we should have been having all along and that we've kind of avoided. And so maybe it's an opportunity to talk more in our church gatherings and small groups and in different times in the church about what the church's needs are and about the impact that we'll make. And so again, I'll talk to you more about that and some of the other tips, but I think don't wait until the end of the year to begin to talk to people about the fact of where we are in terms of finances. I think it's something good to begin talking about. We're right near the end of March, but it's we're moving up to Easter. It's a good time to be talking about it now. My number 4 tip is, I think it's important to focus on the positives, to try and look at this and see where are the opportunities that we have, maybe in our best givers, maybe in our people who have more capacity to give, to encourage and lift up some of the positives. Maybe if people in our congregation are beginning to talk about these tax changes and it's going to have a negative impact on them, maybe it's time for us to highlight some of the things, saying, well, I said, unless you shift brackets, your the bracket numbers, the percentages have gone down a little bit. Maybe people, as they look at what that might save them and the things, maybe that's an opportunity to say, maybe a portion of that we could put that away. Maybe a portion of that could be given to the church. Maybe we could have an opportunity to do some of those things. And again, to remind people that not all the news that came out of the tax change was bad for the church. Some of it actually opens the opportunity for people to even give a little more if they wanted to. I think it's really important, and I've said this in many, many different contexts and many, many different webinars and face-to-face workshops that I've done. And I see my friend Cece Shorman from out in Oregon is on this afternoon for her, tonight for us. And Cece and I talk about this all the time, and she blogs about it, inspiring generosity, about thank you, about the importance of thanking people. I really believe it's one of those places where we can really up our game. Your church may be great at this. In a lot of places, we just have kind of fallen into become very lazy about thanking people. I talk about this with terms of our quarterly statements that we send out to people. They're a wonderful opportunity to celebrate people's giving. They're a wonderful opportunity to say thank you to people. I think we need to find lots of ways. I've done some coursework with the School of Philanthropy up in Indianapolis with people who work in small nonprofits. A lot of the people who were my classmates were development people from small nonprofits. One of the things they say is that when they get a gift from somebody, there's 7 thank yous, minimum of 7 times that they thank people for their gifts. We're hard pressed, I think, to find churches that do that kind of thanking. And I've heard people say, come back to me and say, well, you know, this is not something, this is their personal gift to God. We don't need to thank them for it. Well, the reality is that we're in an environment where people are getting thanked when they're generous. They're getting stroked in some positive way. They're kind of fussed over a little bit. And the reality is that people can make a positive impact in the world in a lot of different ways. And your church wants them to connect at a level with your church. And you want to be thanking them in the way to do that so that it'll reinforce a continued giving or growth in giving and growth in generosity. So again, take a look at how well you're thanking people who make donations to your gift, from the smallest donations to the largest. What are the ways that you're kind of recognizing people for that generosity? I think that's really a key point. And again, some of you have been on webinars with me before, have heard me say this again and again. We really need to up our thank you game. I don't like to talk about competition between other nonprofits and the church, because I think there's enough resources out there. We serve a God of abundance. There's not a shortage of resources. We're not scrambling for the crumbs. But I think as we do that, we have to reflect that, you know, we need to be better at some of the things we do, where in the past we may have been the only opportunity that people saw to do generous giving. We're not the only opportunity anymore. So up your game in terms of thank you, and begin to strategize now the ways you're going to continue to do that. Tip number 6, you hear me say this again and again. We need to tell stories of impact. We need to tell stories of lives that are changed. I love this image of the caterpillar and the butterfly taking off. We need to tell the story of people whose lives are transformed through the ministry of the church. Now, some of these are stories of global stories, of things we do together through our giving, like Africa University, through things like UMCOR, through all the colleges and the universities that we support, through a variety of missions and missionary projects. Some of them are global stories, but there are local stories as well. And oftentimes, when I'm traveling and I'm doing workshops, and I'll tell a story that I know that has impacted me, that I've seen in places around the world, and someone will come up to me and say, well, those stories are great, but you know, our church doesn't have any stories like that. And I tell them all the time, I'll say, you do have stories like that. You have young people in your church who have grown up well and made good decisions and gone on to do great things that were shaped by the people who were part of their church family, who taught their Sunday school classes, who were their counselors in youth group. And those are stories of transformation. They didn't have to choose the path they did, but they were influenced all through their lives by the ministry that touched them through your local church. And those are wonderful transformation stories. Probably in your church, there's someone who's been widowed, who's gone through the loss of a spouse, and they were devastated by it. And it would have been easy for that person to stay in their home and not come out. not want to go back to that environment where they had been with their spouse, and to feel that emptiness, that piece of them that was gone. But you know what happened is people in your church reached out to them and encouraged them and sat with them and talked with them and had tea or coffee with them. And before long, they got invited back into the life of the church, and they became part of that life. They came out of that grief. They still carry some of it with them, but they didn't become a recluse or a hermit. They came back into the living world and became back a part of your church. Well, that's a story of transformation. Families that have gone through a crisis, death of a child, a home that burned, all kinds of stories of places where your church has made an impact. And not just on people within your church, but people around your church, through food pantries, through work that you've partnered with other churches in the community. Well, people want to hear those stories of impact. And I can tell you, I will tell you, and I believe this with all my heart, those stories of impact will have 100 times the weight on influencing people's giving than whether or not they're going to make the threshold for the standard deduction or the itemized deductions on their income taxes next year. These are the things that are going to motivate and keep people giving and encourage people to grow in their giving. So again, if you've been with me before on webinars, you've heard me say this again and again. Tell those stories of impact. Where do we want to do that? Well, you know, you can do that through personal testimonies in church, where people tell about the impact the church has made on their lives. Older people, young people, anybody in between. You know, we have these great channels now that are free for us with social media to be able to tell our story on places like our church Facebook page and invite people in the church to share those stories. Those are wonderful. Our web pages, our church web pages, can be more than just places to put in the Sunday schedule or to list what the scripture is going to be. They can be places to feature those stories as well. Your newsletter can feature those stories. We have all kinds of opportunities to do that kind of storytelling, but to tell people what an impact they can make through their generous giving. And if they give more, we can do more. And so, again, those stories of impact are going to be key. And you can use this opportunity, this time of anxiousness and anxiety, as a way to get your committee together and say, you know what, we need to get some help. We need to gather some of these stories. We need to invite some people to be storytellers with us. And again, the local stories are powerful and great. We also can want to steer people towards stories about how they're making a global impact through the annual conference that you're in, and beyond that, through the global church, through places all around the world. Easy website to remember, I don't have it here, but umcgiving.org is a great place to go and find stories of our global impact. But again, don't just tell just the global stories. Also find the ones that are local, because those are the ones that many times hit closest to people's hearts when they can hear somebody talk about what a difference we've made. Tip number 6, and this is a little more technical, but I think some of you are going to identify this as well. This is the year that I would recommend strongly that we begin tracking, find out how to track our giving year to year. I often see people who track the giving in their bulletin just based on this year. They say, well, you know, they take their budget and they divide it into 52, and they say, this is how much we should have had by March 24th. We should have had this number of Sundays to make our budget, and we're this low. And I think those kind of things have minimal impact. What I do believe is important to do is to begin a process where we're able to track, okay, last year on this particular Palm Sunday, here's where we were in our giving. Here's where we are now. Here's how this Sunday compares to last. Next week you'll be gathering for Easter. Here's how Easter 2018 compares with 2017. Seeing things on a basis where we compare it year to year is going to help you pick up if there are trends. If you're down more weeks than you're up or even, maybe there's something going on. Maybe it can be explained by the death of a particularly good giver you're still missing. But if there is something that's impacting, if people are making decisions to hold back or whatever because of this whole tax change thing or anxiousness, it could just be anxiousness about what the new tax thing is going to be because they really haven't gotten their heads into it yet. Those are things you need to know right up, and it may mean that there needs to be some conversations about it. Maybe we need to do some more. Maybe we need to help people out a little bit. Maybe we need to explain, put this in a better context of what's going on with the taxes. Maybe people just are not aware of the positive sides of it. So tracking it year to year is going to make an important impact. The Lewis Center for Church Leadership, which is based out of Wesley Seminary in Washington, D.C., has some products that I've recommended over the years that help churches do that comparison, comparing, week to week. But, you could do it on your own. It's not hard to do. You just don't necessarily want to lay it out calendar to calendar, but you may want to lay it out around significant days like Easter and Christmas, things like some churches do a homecoming, which is usually a big Sunday for them, Mother's Day, Father's Day, those kind of things, and compare those one to another. And again, helping you to kind of get tipped off if there are some changes in your giving that are going to have a serious impact. So again, this is the year, if you haven't done it yet, to begin tracking that giving year to year. This also may be the year as you begin to look at that and your level of anxiety rises, to look at the opportunity to ask for growth from your reliable givers. It may be a chance, if we haven't done it before, to look at the people who have been the rock of our giving. I was in a meeting earlier today with a man who was involved in a local church, and he said, in most of the churches I've been involved in my life, the reality has been, and finance people have given me the statistic, that about 80% of the church's giving comes from about 20% of the members. That may or may not be the case in the church that you go to. But there may be a core of people who really have been very good givers. And, we have inside us, many of us have a thing that if we have good givers and we talk to them about their giving, that somehow they're going to be offended and they're going to run away and take their giving elsewhere. And I don't believe that there's any basis in that. I mean, if people are confronted in a confrontational way, yeah, that might happen. But everybody who's involved in fundraising on a professional level will say one of the first things you want to do is they want to identify who are the people who are the strongest givers. And what they normally will do is they'll ask those people, they'll say, you're one of the people who really is carrying a great amount of the support and the fuel for the ministry of this church. And it means a lot to us that you're doing that. And so as we move into this next phase, or we move into this year of anxiousness or anxiety, you're going to be one of our leaders. And we're just going to ask you if there's any way that you can, if you can give a little more or you can step up a little bit, we really appreciate it. And it doesn't have to be just the top 3 people or the top 10 people or whatever, or even that 20%. But the opportunity of the anxiousness about this is a good time to say to folks, this is the time that we're living through some uncertainty all around the church and now around this tax situation. We want to be strong. We want to do our ministry. We want to be ready to meet the needs of our community and our global community. So because we have this need, this may be the year where if you can make a step up, maybe as you look at what's happening in the tax situation coming up, you're going to get a little break, and maybe this is the time that you could help us a little bit at the same time. So again, we'll talk more about this, I know, as we go through the year in other webinars. But having conversations with people who are our good givers is not something we should be afraid of. They should be filled with appreciation and thankfulness. We should always make people understand that, that, like I say, their giving is appreciated wherever it is. And as many people have said to me, we don't give preferential treatment to people who are the good givers. We appreciate all the people who give, whatever their level is. But We also wanted to encourage people to not get stuck in their giving and to not hold back in their giving out of fear or uncertainty, but to make that a place where they can take a step of faith. And so, again, consider conversations with people who are in your core group. Certainly people who are sitting around the table at finance who are going to be aware of all these things that we're talking about tonight. Certainly those are people who we can begin to have those conversations with. People who are on the church council, who are at the very heart of what's going on in the life of your church. You may find opportunities to have all those different conversations. So again, this is a year to think about that and do that. Tip number 9 is to be creative in ways that you can cultivate new giving. First thing and the obvious thing about this is the more options people have for giving, the better. And the one right up front is if your church hasn't offered people the opportunity to give consistently through automatic online giving, text giving, giving with their, with an app on their phone or all those things, this is the year to look at it. Look at more ways for people to give. I love this picture of these young people. And many of you are probably like me. You probably have children who are in this millennial group, and you know that they don't carry a checkbook anymore. They don't know how to write a check. Some of them don't carry cash. They have a debit card. That's how they do their transactions, or they do it through Apple Pay or Google Pay or one of the others. And so this is a great time to be asking ourselves the question, how can we make it easier for people to give? How can we give them more options in their giving? One of the things we know that is becoming more and more prevalent in the generosity world is cause giving. Websites that people are setting up to fund individual projects for people. Well, maybe we need to be looking at that in the church and saying, people seem to be more inclined, especially people in this younger generation, seem to be more inclined to give to something specific, some particular project that they know. And so what are the ways that we can identify some of those projects that may already be part of your ministry? One of the stories that I would tell folks is that when I was a new church start pastor, we were meeting in a school, and we really didn't have a place to have dinners or fundraisers or things like that, and that was fine with me. And I kind of said to folks, I said, you know what, God's given us enough to do this thing that we need to do, and we're in good shape. Well, literally the first month that we moved into our building, I had people come up to me and say, okay, now we need to start putting these dinners on, and we need to be raising money to help pay the mortgage payment and to pay the budget and all that. And I had kind of resisted that for the first, we met in school for 10 years, so probably the first 10 years. And but I could tell there was this anxiousness for people. They wanted to get involved and they wanted to contribute in this way. And so we came up with a deal, and I said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We'll pick different items of our mission work that we're responsible for, and things that we were actually going to pay out of the budget anyway. We're already in our budget, like our Africa University apportionment, or our Black College Fund apportionment. And we'd say, let's have a dinner on this night, and Africa University is going to be the focus. And all the money we raise is going to go towards our fair share of Africa University. And we'll use that night as an educational night, and we'll do it that way. Well, in a way, that was cause marketing. That was getting people to know that when they came or they bought their ticket for the dinner or when we passed the basket, that money was specifically going to this cause. And we had the opportunity to tell the stories and focus on it. So being creative in new giving doesn't necessarily mean that we have to adopt a whole bunch of new projects, but we need to look at pieces of our ministry and say, are there ways that we can tell this story better and that we can get people to get motivated to give into some of those places? Another way to be creative in giving and cultivating new giving oftentimes is to find some people in your church who might be in a financial position to make a matching gift. And so you encourage people in the church to say, we're trying to offer this matching gift of $10,000, say. And if we can raise the full $10,000, it's that your every dollar that you give is actually going to be like two because we have this match. And people are motivated by that. They see that as an opportunity to give. I worked with a church a few years ago that they were predicting that they were going to fall short on paying their conference apportionments by $50,000. And so we talked about different things, and when I made this idea, the suggestion, and I said, you may not have somebody who can put up $25,000. I said, but I bet, and it was a pretty good-sized church. They had a $50,000 apportionment bill. I said, I bet you have 25 families who could put up $1,000. And a person right at the table said, I know we do. I know 25 people I know right now who could put up that matching gift. And so they had this group of people who put up that gift, and some of them actually put up more than 1,000. So they reached their 25,000 match, and then they challenged the congregation to say, we've got these folks who are willing to match our gifts one-to-one if we can raise $25,000. And in a flash, they had raised that $50,000, so they would end their year paying 100% of their apportionments. So again, a match might be the thing that motivates people. A couple of years ago, I heard an interesting idea for giving that one particular church was doing, and it intrigued me, and I really didn't know exactly what to do with it at the time, but I've been thinking about it in context that we're in now. And that was a church that had organized in the midst of their church what they called giving circles. And some of you may be more familiar with this than I was. It was kind of the first time that I heard about this a few years ago. And really what it was done, it was sort of like small groups that have been organized around where people kind of pooled their money together so they could do some really creative things in mission. Sometimes it was little loans that could be done with folks in some of the third world countries that are very poor to help people raise themselves out of poverty. Those are the kind of projects they can do. Sometimes they were more local projects where people pulled their money together. But one of the things I think that's kind of unique about this opportunity to do that, and again, I need to do some exploring about this to see exactly what the mechanics would be. But you might have a group of say it was 3 families that came together, and they were going to take turns pooling some of their giving in a way that would enable one of the families each year to give a larger amount, and then again move into that larger itemized benefit of that. Again, I'm not a tax attorney, I'm not a CPA to know about that. I know that there's a threshold for how much you can give to another person that you're not related to. Anyway, there might be some creative ways about that we can look at to see how people can do that. Certainly, if you have a church that has many generations of the same family, certainly that may be an opportunity for one part of that family for the parents to give generously in one year, for the children, the grown children, to have an opportunity to give another year. Look at these things creatively, and again, I'm going to do more exploring on that giving circles idea because I think there's some potential there. I see my time is running low. Last tip that I want to give you is this one, and that's I just think we need to think bigger and we need to think longer, especially in this particular climate. We need to think beyond just this year and December 31st. We need to think, are there needs that are out there that are going to be on the horizon that this might be an opportunity for people to give a little bit ahead. We have some great resources for churches that have not raised an endowment, but want to start an endowment fund to maybe take care of some special needs in the church, or maybe a special ministry, maybe maintenance on the building that needs to be done and continued. This might be that opportunity to invite folks to make those kind of gifts. And again, if we believe that the itemized deduction is an incentive for folks, maybe we do this gift now or whatever, and it gives people the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? These changes are on us now, and the threshold has been raised, But if we can, give a little above and beyond, all that stuff is going to be helpful. You'll get that itemized deduction back. It could be, again, it could also be the possibility of people who have the resources to do it, to invite them to do a little bit of giving for next year, or all their giving for next year and this year. It's important if you do that, if you invite people to give ahead, that the church has some way to keep that money aside and to sort of reserve it, so you're going to need it in the coming year as well. So that's a key part of that. I remember right after 9/11, I was working on the conference staff in New Jersey, and we had a lot of people in New Jersey who were impacted by 9/11. And the church as a whole took up amazing offering for Love in the Midst of Tragedy, is what the offering was called, to help people who were survivors of 9/11. And we had a lot of them in New Jersey. And we made a proposal to UMCOR for some of that money. And they sent our proposal back, and the words they said to me, and I'll never forget it, is you're not thinking big enough, and you're not thinking long enough. And we came back with a proposal that covered 4 years of helping people get back on their feet, of working with social workers, retraining them, getting them in homes they could afford, all these different things. So this might be the year to cast your vision a little bigger and a little broader. Think a little farther ahead into the future. It may be an opportunity, it may be a blessing to your church, that this might be a year when you ask folks to give a little more, and that you're prepared a little more for things that might come down to you in the future. So anyway, Jason, I've gone right to my limit here, but I do want to take a minute to answer some questions if we have them, and I also invite people, they can send me questions. I'm always happy to respond to them best I can. Again, I'm not going to be able to give out tax advice like Don could do, or whatever, but I can certainly help a little bit.
Absolutely. And so we're pretty much on the edge of time, so why don't we take just a couple questions. If you want to use your Q&A panel, in the top right you should see a little Q&A, and you can start. We've got a couple that have already been asked. Also, before I do that, I had a couple of questions about the past clergy taxes webinar, and that's really useful too, because one of the cool things we did is we had so many questions, we actually compiled them all into their own little resource. So I'm posting that in the link right now, and a lot of if we don't get to your question, check this out. Very, very useful if you weren't on that webinar, and you can also download a compilation of, still to this day, I have people emailing me questions, and had a lot of questions that we answered there, not only in the webinar, but following it, and we just kind of compiled that. So let's do it.
I'm still getting them questions.
Still getting them. That was what, that was February 12th, and we're still getting them.
When you go to this website, you will see the link for watching the archive, watching the video, and that says register for the recorded video webinar.
Yes.
You'll also see the handouts from that if you didn't get a chance to go to it, and you'll see this Q&A document that Blake is mentioning, and it's a great resource. And thank heavens for Don Joyner, who helped me answer a lot of these questions. I couldn't have answered them by myself.
He just loved it. He went through it and kept doing it. I don't know how I had time, but I think
you're getting expertise for free, because he does taxes for people and charges.
Exactly. So
if a lot of expertise.
I think we ran out of time and didn't get to questions, so you might want to start there. But let's go and throw a couple in. So we have a question here of, do you have any recommended tools that you use for tracking giving year to year?
Yeah, and that would be the resource is it's the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. If you Google that, Lewis Center for Church Leadership. And they have a whole bunch of great stewardship resources. They have great articles and pieces as well. But they have a program for tracking giving over a 3-year period is what they recommend, is you go back 3 years and you're constantly adding the new gift to that. You can do a similar thing with an Excel spreadsheet. If you have somebody in the church who's good with Excel, maybe they're already recording, again, this is not individual people's contributions, but total offerings, throughout the years. Basically, what we're talking about is tracking income. You can do it. You can do a similar thing with an Excel spreadsheet and have somebody go in and do a little work on that. But If you go to Lewis Center for Church Leadership, that's the one that I often recommend to people, and just see the product they're offering. I don't think it's very expensive.
And I just put the link to that on the chat section too. So churchleadership.com, so you can just put that there. So let's see, we have quite a few coming in. What is the best approach for monetizing equity in church land, buildings, etc.? Do you have any resources for that?
Ooh,
that's a big one.
It is a big one. I have a good friend who works. He's a director of the United Methodist City Society in New York, where property value is so high that he has a formula for doing that and kind of saying to people, what the land they own, what that money, what that asset could produce for mission, and to kind of compare it to what it's being utilized for, staying as a church and serving. In other words, instead of being a meeting place for Christians to be able to use that money to be in mission and put people out in a mission. But I haven't found another actual resource that's done that. So I don't know if here I want to share these 2 webinars coming up. But here's my email address. If you send me some information, I'll send you a link to a story. I just saw a story in the news service about work that the City Society had done with the church, and it'll give you an example of that. That's probably the best thing I can offer you.
And Ken, I'll make sure that if you can just send me that. You said you made a PDF of the, I believe it was Guide to Effective Giving After Tax Reform. I found that online, but you do have to, they're selling a mailed copy, so if you have that PDF, and you're able to distribute it, we can make sure that's sent out in the email as well. So lots of resources for everybody.
Yeah, that's that AU one that I scanned. It's just I didn't have a PDF version of it, but I scanned it on our copier there, and I can send that to you. Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's do the last question here. Looks like this is actually the last one we have. So not as many. I think everybody's a little overwhelmed with all the information. There's so much here. Who is the best position to make the request for growth from reliable givers? Is this the pastor or the finance chairperson? Who do you go to?
Well, I think that's a real good question. I think one of the great ways to do it, I think if your pastor, I think pastors are good people to do that. I also think it's good for the pastor to go with somebody from the congregation who has a close relationship with the person that you're looking for. And so, your pastor may not have the longevity of relationship that some of the lay people are going to have. And so I always think it's good, as a pastor, I would be very happy to go with, it might be the lay leader, it might be somebody else in the church who has a relationship. And again, I go back to what I've learned from nonprofit folks who do these kind of major gift visits or whatever, is they usually actually do multiple visits. They'll do multiple talks. One of the things that's important about this is what I've learned is to have conversations with people, especially if some of our congregations have people who have great means. The first place to start with that is to begin to talk with them and listen to them about what it is that excites them and that ignites their passion in the church. That's kind of what I was saying right up in the front, is saying, what are the things that really get people in your congregation excited? Well, if you're asking somebody for a particular gift, if you can talk to them about the things that excite them, the things that really generate their passion, and I'll give you, I know we're over time, I'll give you a quick example of this personally. My wife and I are very excited about Africa University. I talk about it all the time. I think it's one of the great things we've done. And so in our will, I lost a child. Our oldest child died at 29. And so in our will, the portion of our estate that he would have gotten is going to go to Africa University. So long time from now when we die. So I talked to my wife and I said, well, do we want to do a scholarship? What school? What do we want to do? Well, Bridget has a passion for feeding people. That's her strongest drive. That's the thing that motivates her to give. If people don't have enough food, she will give the last $5 dollar that she has in her pocket to do that. That's, and she's lived through some times where, there wasn't enough money to buy the groceries that she needed. She relates to that. My passion is around education. I just think education is one of the most important things we can do for people, for young people, so they can, have a better life. They can, take care of their families better. So when we talked about AU, we said, what if we set up a scholarship for the School of Agriculture? So somebody is going to get education and somebody's going to learn how to feed people. But, again, if somebody were looking to do that, they would have to talk to us for a while to find out those things that really drove us and gave us passion. And I think that's one of the key things that you want to do. So you might want to, if you're going to make a visit to somebody and asking them to give or raise their giving significantly, make sure you listen first. Make sure you hear the things that really are going to ignite their passion, and then hopefully connect them to something that your church is doing that they can really get excited about.
Wow, well, that's a great question to end on, I think. That's wonderful. Well, Ken, I appreciate you staying late to go through this, because I know this is a lot of information. I'm really appreciative that you took the time. So, again, this is wonderful, and we will send out. This recording should be available tomorrow afternoon, so I'll do my best to get it emailed out to everybody then, and from there on out, it'll be on the umcdiscipleship.org resources. It'll be under webinars, archived webinars. So if you need to share it with anybody, or somebody asks you a question, you say, oh, actually, I know exactly where that can be answered. That's where to go. So, yeah, Ken, anything else you want to add to wrap up here?
Yeah, I do. I just want to say to everybody, we're coming into Holy Week and Easter. This is one of those times when I'm no longer leading a local church. I was 20 years of doing crazy schedules for Holy Week and Easter, and I know we have some clergy out there who have got a very busy week coming up. I hope you have a very blessed Holy Week, all of you, whether you're lay or clergy, and I hope you have the joy of Easter. I hope that you invite people to give in a joyous way to this, and all this other stuff we're going through now, all this anxiousness or whatever, we're going to come through this, and just have a wonderful Easter. Hopefully it's a time of renewed for you and for your church. So your church is full of people who are hungering for what we have to offer, for meaning and connection with God. So have a wonderful Easter. Blake, thank you for all the work you did to make this happen.
Yeah, amen to that. And again, everyone, thanks for joining us. And as we're talking about giving, just a reminder, this is a production of Discipleship Ministries and is made possible by the generous support of World Service Fund. So another, as we're talking about giving going on. So you can register for future webinars at the address I gave previously, umcdiscipleship.org, and we have also some archived webinars about taxes there as well. So again, Ken, thank you very much, and everybody, we hope to see you on future webinars, and look for links in your email soon with those resources.
Have a great night, everybody.
All right, good night.